Hello and welcome back to Web Design for Small Business. In this video, part 23, AJAX, we're going to be talking about using JavaScript to communicate with PHP in order to check our username field to see if the username is already taken in the database. So before we start, a little bit of house cleaning from our previous video. If we go back into our update cust file, there's one simple thing at the end here where we have all of our different variables and we update the server if they're selected. The messages that we have, so the E message and the C message, both of these have the equal sign, but they don't have it as dot equal. So if there were any previous error messages or confirmation messages, they'll be overwritten. So one big way to look at this is if you're updating multiple fields, you're only going to get either an error message or a confirmation message for the last one in that list, and then it won't give you a message for the other ones. But we want it to have messages for all of them. So what we need to do is every time we see that equal sign, we have to add a dot in front of it. So just quickly going through and updating that. Little things we catch as we're doing our post-production editing. And there we go. Save that, and then we won't close this yet because we're going to, actually no, we can close this one. We don't need that anymore. We need our account though. So this one we're still going to do more with. But first what we need to do is, actually no, we can work with here first. Okay, so in our account.php file, find our JavaScript for the username. And we want it in the change, not the key up. So if username is equal to nothing, then reset it and hit key up. So here, hit enter for a new line. And here we type else and curly bracers. And in here, what we're going to do is we're going to create an AJAX request. So with jQuery, jQuery makes sending AJAX requests very, very easy. If you're wondering what AJAX is, it is asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Basically, JavaScript came up with a way of communicating directly with PHP through XML requests. And this came into play in the previous iteration of HTML when we introduced XHTML, which was the combination of HTML and XML, which then we kind of evolved into HTML5. However, what it means is basically we can use JavaScript to communicate with PHP scripts. So our front end can communicate with our back end. What this allows us to do is it allows JavaScript to communicate with the database through the PHP functions. So what we can do is we can call that. So how that works, it's a $, dot, And then there's one of three things you can do. You can either make a post request, a get request, or a generic AJAX request. If you do AJAX, then you have to specify the type, whether it's get or post. Since we're going to be doing post request, we can skip some of that and just write post. So $.post and parentheses with a semicolon after it. And this is all within a JavaScript. Okay, so now it's going to look for a series of fields, which is essentially three. So the first thing it'll look for is a URL, which is the PHP file that it's connecting to. So like in a form, the action file here, basically it wants one of these for a post request. So that's the first thing we're going to do. So in double quotes, we are going to type https://highway45.ca/resources/vun.php. We haven't created this file. It does not exist, but we will right after. After that, we hit comma. And then the next thing it looks for is an array of data that we want to pass through. So how we represent that is basically with a set of curly bracers, which basically creates a JavaScript object. And inside those, we can use basically key and value pairs for any data that we want to pass across. So in this case, we would want to send our user variable. So we could do something like user, sorry, it has to be in quotes again, user colon and user and semicolon. No, comma, sorry. Okay. So basically each pair that we have looks like this. You have the key, a colon, the value of that key, and then separated by a comma. Now, because this is a string, it's got the double quotes there. Because this, I want to use our variable that we created, the variable user, it does not have quotes. So that's why this one has quotes, this one does not. And actually, I don't need to pass anything else, just that username. And then the last one is how you receive the data. So it should always be in a function. And in the function, you want to call data. And sorry, we just lost our parenthesis here on the outside of our post when we did this function. So I want to make sure that is still there. Okay. So function, data, and inside here, that is where we basically will work with the data that gets pulled from here as a result. So for now, we will just write that out to the console. So we type in console.log parenthesis semicolon, inside the parenthesis we type in data. Okay, so save that out. And now we're going to go and create this file. Then we're going to come back to it after. So resources, new PHP file, VUN, enter, delete that stuff, and the PHP. So the first thing we want to do with this is we want to require our core file. You can just copy that from any of the other ones, or you can retype it if you feel like. Require home home, your username, whatever your secure folder is, and whatever you labeled your core file. Okay. So once we have that, then we need to write our post request. So user is equal to filter input post user filter callback options set to data secure. Okay, so that will pull out that username. Then what we want to do is check the username. So check u is equal to MySQLi query parentheses semicolon, inside there our database highway 45DE comma double quotes. Inside the double quotes we want select asterisks for all from lowercase customers. Select all from customers. So this will literally select every single thing in that table customers. Okay, now we want to create a variable called unum and just set it to 0. And then while parentheses, inside the parentheses, our value unum is less than, in lowercase, MySQLi underscore num underscore rows parentheses, inside the parentheses, check u, outside of all the parentheses, curly bracer, enter. It will give us our end curly bracer. In front of the first, or after the first curly bracer, just unum plus plus semicolon, and that will increment that unum variable so that we don't have a continuous loop or infinite loop, sorry. Then on the next line, $u equals MySQLi underscore fetch underscore assoc parentheses semicolon, inside the parentheses, check u. So this will pull up our first row. So basically, because we're selecting all the customers, so every single row of customers, this will, and because we're doing it within a while statement, this function will actually call each row individually. So we start with the first row, then go on to the second and the third, and keep going until we loop through all of them. Next line, if parentheses user variable double equals data decode to parentheses, inside the parentheses, u square brackets, inside the square brackets, single quotes, inside the single quotes, username. So if our user variable that we pulled from here, from our post, is equal to the first row's username decoded, Then curly bracers ID is set to U, square brackets, single quotes, ID, semicolon. So if the user is equal to the username in that row, then we want to set the ID to the ID from that row. Then we want to mysqli underscore free underscore result, parentheses, semicolon, inside the parentheses, check U. What this does is anytime you have a select field, so you're accessing the MySQL database and you're doing a select function, and it selects more than just one field that you're aware of. So when you know it's going to select multiple fields, and you're not going to go through all of the fields, you're going to leave some behind. If you don't do this, that will stay in the RAM and use up processing power for no reason, and then it can just start bogging down your computer if you get more and more of that, which could lead to your site crashing, which we don't want. So freeing that up just prevents that kind of stuff from happening. It's rare when you actually need to use it, and some cases you might get an error message if you try to use it in places where you shouldn't. Honestly, you might even get an error message using it here, but it won't be one that breaks it. It would just be a warning saying usually it doesn't like the way that we format the query, but it is what it is. Anyway, that, and then after that is break, semicolon. So what the break does is it will break us out of the while loop. So if the user is equal to username, set the ID to our ID and break us out. Okay, which means that we also need to then set our ID to something. So we want that, we can put it up here. Or if we want that while to be in front, let's cut that out, put that over here, and ID is also equal to 0. So unum and ID are equal to 0. Actually, you know what? I am just going to break it apart and have them two separate things. Yeah. Unum is equal to 0, ID is equal to 0, because we don't have an ID numbered 0, so that's fine. Okay. So then after we break that out, then we just want to echo the ID and exit. And that's it. That's all we need for this page. Save that. So what happens with AJAX requests is it's similar to the same page that we would do for a form request page with PHP, except the way that a form is loaded is it will load the page, go through all the code, and then at the end it'll either just create a blank page, or if we tell it to go somewhere else and do something else, it'll do that. With these, because it's not actually loading the page in the foreground, what it looks for is an echo request. So basically it will take whatever you're printing to screen after it's done, and that's the data that it receives. So it will, you can post any variable to it. So in this case we posted the user variable, which will contain the username that the person typed into the field, and what it will pump back out is the ID. So basically, if there is no account with that username, it will give us an ID of 0. Otherwise, it will give us an ID number. So all we need to do then is to check if we received an ID greater than 0. So we will go to our page here, just refresh that. We're going to inspect so that we open up our log here and click on console, the console tab. And now when we change the username and hit tab, note that now it says 0. If I type in Vic, it put in 7. So that is the user ID for Vic. Bubbles. Bubbles does not have a username, so it is 0. So you get the idea. So now what we do is in here, we can delete that console log, which, by the way, is the best way to test JavaScripts. If you're wondering what's going on, you can send any information to the console log, so variables to see if they're working, what data they're giving out, put them in a console log. Likewise, if you want to see if some of your PHP script is working or not, you can send PHP into your console log by essentially just, instead of this, you would basically create its own line. So JS dot equals to single quotes. In the single quotes, you would go console dot log parentheses semicolon, and then within here you would go double quotes, which would mean that you're typing in a string, and then within that the double quotes you would go single quotes and dots, and then you would type in your PHP variable, whatever that may be, and then you can actually check what that PHP variable is in your script at the end. So good way for testing stuff. Anyway, deleting that. So then we go if data is greater than 0, then I'm just checking to see if we've already called our var change, which we haven't. So I'm going to break this out onto a new line because it's going to take up some extra space. So we need to call var change. Then we need to change and replace username with nothing. Set that to change. So this whole line here, copy and paste that in. And then we remove class has success, and then add class has error. Okay, so then over here where we remove class has error, we also want to remove class, or remove class has success, remove class has error, and where we add class success, we want to remove class has error. Okay. So we save that. oh look, the username AmazingBee is already taken, so it's giving us an error message. So I have to type in AmazingBee2, and that one works. And since it works, we have the submit changes. If it doesn't work, because we picked one that already is selected, then it no longer gives us that. Now, with this, you may wonder, well, what happens if we make changes that it does accept? So, if I change the last name, so this one is errored out, this one is okay, which then gives us this submit changes button. What will happen there, if you go to your inspect and you pull up your body content, open up the container, panel, body, form. That first line again, or change, notice it just has lname as a value. Because this is errored out, it doesn't add that to our change, so it won't change that. It'll just keep it whatever it was before, and that value doesn't get changed. So that's important to keep in mind. Although there's an error, it just means that it's not going to update that. It will update this because it was greenlit, essentially. So when they submit changes, it won't update that with the error. Okay, back to our coding here. So now what we can do is we can set all of this for our registration page. Okay, so for the account page, first of all, I see a couple things I want to just quickly fix. We have a variable here and here that don't have the new line after, so I'm going to quickly add that. Dots, double quotes, \n. Just break those out to a new line, save that. Okay, now we don't need to copy all the information, we only need a few things. So the first one I'm going to take is our update hide. So I'm going to copy that, go to our registration page, give ourselves some space, and I'm going to change update to register. So this will hide the registration button initially. Go back into our account. And sorry, that VUN page, we can actually close that too. We don't need that open anymore. Okay, so we have the account. We don't need the change. We do want the reset. So copy that, paste that in. But we don't need this change value part. Just the remove classes has success and has error. Save that. Back into the account. So we're going to copy this whole username part and then just kind of pick through what we need. Okay, so the whole thing that checks the username as we're typing, we don't actually need any of that. We're just going to be working with change functions. So username change, pull the username up. If username is blank, so normally we would set it back to the username, but we don't have one because they're creating a new account and setting them to key up. So we're going to delete this part. And what we're going to do is we are then going to tell it that there's an error. So username dot add class has error. And for that, we're going to remove class has success. So if the username is blank, then we're going to say there's an error message. And we're going to need some other form of passing data through this. So underneath the input for our username, we're going to enter another field, another input. Type is going to be hidden. ID is going to be equal to val, and name is going to be equal to val, and value is going to be equal to blank. Actually, we'll have the value set to 0, so there's something in there. Okay, so that's there. Right here, we're going to put the we need parent, sorry, because we have to apply those to the parent element, not to the direct element. Okay, so if it's not blank, then we check the username. And do all of this, but we don't need to do the change part. So we can delete all of that. We just want this part. Username, parent, remove class has success, add class has error. Okay, then between these two curly braces, hit enter, and else, and another set of curly bracers. So essentially, if our data is greater than 0, which means that the username is taken, give us an error message. Otherwise, we want it to do the opposite. Copy and paste. Remove class has error, and add class has success. So that way, it lets the person know that that username is good. Okay, now in order to confirm that, we're going to work with that val. Actually, we need it to be username dash, I'm just going to call it V because with the username it's already pretty long. Actually, I'm going to call it V hyphen username. Okay. Or we should be using camel caps, so V username with a capital U. There we go. That's our ID and name. This time for sure. Okay. Back to it. So now we want to username val is 1. And we're going to copy that, and in here paste that, too many spaces. And here it's going to be 0 because it's bad. We don't want that. And by default it's 0 because there's nothing entered by default. So basically once it has a username that we like, then that value is changed to 1. So here where it also has an error, add that. Set it to 0. I'm just going to knock this down to the next line. Actually, I'm going to cut that out and paste it there. So if, else, if, else. Okay, so these things aren't really lined up right, but for the most part, that works. Okay. So save that. Okay, now if we want, we can test that. Log out, go to create account, enter username, so we know that amazing bee is already taken, so that gives us red. If we inspect, go to body content, container, panel, body, form. No, that has error, right? Okay, so this hidden v username has a value of 0, and watch that value if it changes when I write that. This, noticed it kind of popped there, has success instead of has error, and this value is changed to 1. So we know that works. Okay, so then what we're going to do is for our register button, which should be hidden and isn't, so let's look at why that isn't working. So register, hide. Oh, because it has a name but no ID. Same with this, I'm guessing. So we need to create IDs for both of these. Okay, so now if I refresh, the register button is gone. So what we'll do is, once all the requirements are met, we will make that register button reappear, and we'll note that because these hidden values will be changed to 1. Okay, so now the next one, for the password, we need the passwords to match. So if we go back to our account, find our password 1, password 2, copy those, paste them up here. So the first thing I'm going to do is change the key up to a change. Okay, so the first thing we do is we pull our password 1 and password 2 variables and the change, but we're going to delete that change from both of them. Okay, if pass1 is set and pass1 is equal to pass2, then do a bunch of stuff. So that doing a bunch of stuff, we're going to get rid of the change parts so that we just have the password1 parent remove class has error and add class has success. So if pass1 and pass2 are equal to each other and pass1 exists, then we're giving a success message. And we're going to do that same thing. We're going to create a new variable, input, type equals hidden, ID equals the password, name is equal to the password, and value is equal to 0. Okay, here, after we remove the error, add the class, then we're going to add our vPassword value, so dot val parentheses and 1. And because these are integers, they don't need the quotations. Okay, else, so if the passwords do not match, so remove that first part with all the changes again. Password 1 parent, remove class has success, add class has error, and then we're going to make our vpass 0. And if our password is not set, delete the change stuff again, remove both has success and has error because it's not set yet, and add our vPassword but set that to 0. And then basically we need to make our password 2 look identical to our password 1. Go through and quickly do that. Password 1 remove. Else password 2. You are 0. Finally, password 1 parent, remove both of those, and also 0. Okay, only have one. So delete the extra curly brace end on both of those. Hit save. Refresh. No errors in the console. Okay, so test. They don't match, so it's red. If I type test again, now it likes it. If I go back and I remove one of those letters, it doesn't like it. And value 0, value 1. Okay, so the password works now. Now, we don't need to do anything with the first or last name. We want to format our phone number, email address, and postal code. And that's really all we need to change here. So the next is our phone number. Phone. I will take a wild stab in the dark that the only one we're going to need is the bottom change one. Copy. Okay, so for phone, if phone is not equal to anything, then do that. We don't actually need this part, so we can delete that. delete the if, and just straight up do it. Okay, so delete that else, and then we're going to delete this end curly bracer too. Okay, so we grab our phone variable and we replace it with just numbers. Then we check to see if the first digit is a 1, and we do our formatting. Else, if the first digit is not a 1, we do our formatting. If the phone length is equal to whatever that is, do all that stuff. And if phone length is less than 15, so our number is now too short, this is where we get our error message coming in. So we need to just delete all of those changes. We can remove this has success part. And we will just add the class error. Okay. Then, after that, so if phone.length is less than 15, then phone.parent.add class has error. Else, and then we're just going to copy this and paste it in there, and instead of add, we're going to hit remove. So we're not actually going to greenlight this one. We're just going to give it an error message if it's too short, and remove the error message if it's not. And save that. Refresh this, and in our phone number, formatted it. If, however, I remove a couple digits, now it doesn't like it. But I suppose we're also going to have to track that. So under our phone number, we're going to create another variable. Input type is equal to hidden. ID is equal to, and the order of ID and name doesn't matter. If you have one before the other doesn't matter. As none of the orders of the actual attributes matter so long as they're in there. If it comes down to styling, it might. If you have something applied to the ID and something applied to a class, and the ID is before the class will probably override the ID. But other than that, order doesn't really matter for the sake of if it will accept it or not at all. ID v phone name is equal to v phone value is equal to 0. Save. And remove class has error, which means that our vphone val1 and this one vphone val0. this little guy here, delete that curly bracer, and put that curly bracer over here. Because we don't need that extra stuff, clogging everything up. So this can go back here. So if that, else that. And then just do that after. That's much neater. Pump this down there. There we go. Just cleaning that up a little bit. All this stuff that I just did doesn't actually make a difference whatsoever on the script. It's just making it neater on the page. Okay. So the phone number is done. Now we need to go to the email address. And copy the change part of the email address, paste that in there, change email if email doesn't equal anything, so we're going to delete that part altogether. Delete that else. Delete all the change parts here. Delete that last trailing curly bracer. Okay, so remove has success. We're going to get rid of that because we won't have a has success on this one again. We'll just have an add class error. And v email dot val 0, because this basically checks to see if it's missing an @ sign or it's missing a dot. So if it's missing either of those, then it has an error and the value is 0. Else copy that, paste it in there. Remove class error and value is set to 1. So now in our email, we need to add that input field. Type is equal to hidden. ID is equal to the email. Name is equal to the email. Value is equal to 0. Save. Save and save often. Postal code. Test the email address. Refresh. Test at test.test. No errors. If I remove the dot, now it gets an error. If I put a dot back in, it likes me again. Okay. So account, we're looking for a postal code. And again, we just want the change one. Copy, register. Okay. So if PC is blank, delete that whole thing again. Delete the else. And delete the last line here. Enter after this. Right there. We're going to put the var on a new line with the PC to uppercase. Okay, so if the length that, this creates our zip code. We don't need to do the key up part, but we'll keep everything else. Then that, and then we will give this our approval. Pound V, and I'm going to go capital P and capital C. This technically PC is an initialism for postal code. Bell 1. Then if it's not that, then give us just letters and capital letters and numbers and format it for us. Format more, format more. If the length is less than 7, then we don't like you and we want to give you an error message. Bell 0. And here we're actually going to make sure that we remove that. I don't even think we did that in the other one. Okay, so dot parent dot remove class has error. Okay, that should have been in the last one, but did, and I just got rid of it. I'll check that after. Alright. Finish this guy off. Okay, so then we add class as error, give that. Else. I think I have one too many curly bracers again, so I'm going to delete that one. delete the key up. Parent dot remove class has error VPC value 1. And now we just need to create that variable under here. Postal code. Input type is equal to hidden. ID is equal to VPC. Name is equal to VPC. And value is equal to 0. Save that. Okay, now so the only thing we need for this to complete it is having those linked to our registration button. First, I'm just going to go back to our account and double check what we did with our postal code here as far as the coloring went. Oh yes, we did the key ups for that. Right, that's what that did. Okay, so it's covered in there. Right. But we removed the key ups from here, which is why we needed to manually go in and add those. Okay, it's now linking this to our registration button. So we're going to go back up here. So the first thing we're going to do is create a function. Function validate. Okay, so within our function called validate, we grab a var, and we're going to call this v1 is equal to username dot val. Password. Phone. Email. PC. And I'm probably forgetting something. Phone, email, PC, password 1 and 2. password for. So that's it. Okay. So we pull each of those values, and then we go var validated is equal to v1 plus v2 plus v3 plus v4 plus v5 if validated is equal to 5, register dot fade in, else register dot fade out. Alright, so we created this function called validate, and it checks for a bunch of variables, and if each one is set to 1, we add those up, and if the total is 5, so each one of those is equal to 1, then we change the register to fade in, else fade out. So now all we need to do is call this every time we change it, or change the value. And we do that by simply calling that function. Validate like that. However, instead of doing it for each of these, all we need to do is do it after all of those. So basically, in our line where we have that, I'm just going to add it in front of that. For each of those. If you want to be a stickler, you can hit enter there and then tab that over. I'm not, I'm just going to leave it like that. Okay, so now we go and test it, and there's one thing I want to kind of point out that may or may not be an issue and a workaround we can do for it. So first, we're only testing the variables that we have special changes for. So the phone number, the email address, the postal code, the username and password. We will add after each and every single field, so that basically just checks to see if those fields have anything in them, because nothing is supposed to be empty, with the exception of address 2, which we won't check for. So once all those things are filled, then we will show that register button. However, just with the ones that we have, I've already noticed an issue creep up. So I've gone ahead and just added some extra code to display those errors. Okay, so as soon as I type something in, we'll see a bunch of stuff come in on our commands here. Okay, so you see 1 through 5, and then this purple number at the bottom. So the purple number should be our total, and these are literally our 5 fields that we're checking for and what their current values are. So once I type in test again for password, note that now it'll reprint, and our second variable, which is our password, is now set to 1, which gives us a total of 1. So no issues there. number test at test.test, and then notice if I break something, it takes that score away. Add it back, fixes it, we get it again, we're back to 3, and okay, so no issues there. However, with the username, note that it didn't actually add the value there, right? However, it is added there, and if I just go in here and change this to T, which will give us 0 there, note now the 1 is showing up there. Put that back. Now we have all 5, and if we scroll down, our register is there. If I take away anything so that we lose it, it's gone again. Okay, so why is the username delayed, right? It doesn't work when we first type it in. We have to type in the username and then do one of the other fields in order for it to work, and that's what's happening. If I delete the username, it still shows because there's a delay on this. It's not actually registering this change until we've made another change. Now they're both gone. That doesn't register it. That registered both of them, right? Okay, so let's take a look at the actual code to see what's going on there. So what's happening is when this JavaScript is actually being read, it doesn't actually work in kind of a first come first served basis, where you would think that it would basically execute the code in the order that it's written. So do this, then this, then this, then this. What it does is it actually executes it all within the same block, all together at once, simultaneously. So what's happening is because we're doing this post request, which actually takes a few microseconds to process, this validate is actually happening before the value is actually being set. So before this username value gets set to 1, it's already validating it. And because it's trying to pull it up and it doesn't exist, yet it's getting 0 and it's not registering. So what we can do to fix that, I mean, we can live with it. It is the first field there, and as soon as they type in the password, it'll get both. And visually, it's not going to affect much, but just so that you're aware and why this is happening, what we can do is we can do what's called a timeout. So we go set timeout with a capital T. Everything else is lowercase. Parenthesis. Delete the first parenthesis after the validate. So set timeout in parenthesis our word validate. After validate, a comma and the number 100. Save that and then go back into it. Refresh. Test. And test now is instantly 1. So what I did there, instantly, is in quotations. This set timeout, this number is in milliseconds. So this is basically 1/10 of a second. 100 is 1/10 of a second. After that timeout, so basically when all these different things are trying to run all at the same time, this starts, but it starts counting down. So it counts 100 milliseconds and then executes this function. So the function is our validate function, right? So basically we just need to set this number high enough that it's going to allow enough time for this post to happen. So you could essentially set this higher if we want to visibly see it. So I set it for 2000, which is 2 seconds. If I refresh this now and type in test and hit enter, oh, not enter, never enter. Why did I do that? Test, refresh. And hit tab. And boom, that comes up after 2 seconds because that's how long that delay took. And this shows up once that validate has been called. So to try that again, but just to see an actual difference. So as soon as I put in my password, it's called each time with password. So it's called when you fill out either form, but they have to match before it validates it, which is why the first one showed 0 and the second one shows 1. So now if I type in my username, boom, it takes 2 seconds before it validates it, but it still validates it. So like I said, what we can do is we can just set that to 100 and save that. Now you can do that with each of them. It might be a good idea if you're getting any delayed errors, but typically they should be fine. The reason why this one specifically was so troublesome was because of our AJAX request, because that takes more processing time. Again, it's almost instantly, and we really don't notice because this is measured in basically microseconds. But when this gets done in 1 microsecond and this gets done in 3 microseconds, this gets done last. So that's our issue, and that is the fix for it. Okay, now that we've done that, I'm going to just go through. You can see I got some stuff there. I'm going to delete all of those and just get our code back, and then we can go ahead and start adding all the other fields. Okay, so I'm back. Now, one thing I want to point out is when we were adding these, because JavaScript, as I hopefully have mentioned before, I have mentioned it before, but I might have actually cut out the part where I mentioned it. JavaScript uses the plus sign to join variables and strings instead of the dot that is used by PHP. So with PHP, you're joining with the decimal point or the period sign, whatever you want to call that. With JavaScript, the joining symbol is the plus sign. But it's also the addition sign, which is why it gets complicated and why PHP doesn't use it. But we're stuck with it. So when we do this, it actually just adds the numbers together as strings. So we get basically 11,111 instead of 5 if those are all 1. So what we need to do is we need to ensure that our variables are being selected as numbers, and in order to do that we call the number function. So basically we just take each of our variables that we're calling, so the value of whatever, and we put that in a set of parentheses, and in front of that, number with a capital N. And what that does is it basically forces this to become an integer. So forcing each one of those to be an integer, then adding those values, and then it works. Okay, so now that we have those 5, we're going to go ahead and add the other ones. So we need our first name, last name, and all we're doing for those is checking that they exist. So if fname.val var 6 is set to 0. Plus B6 6. Console.log validated. So I'm just adding this to verify that when this gets added, two things. Number one, that when we change the first name, we're actually getting a 1. So this recognizes that by me doing that, it's asking if something exists in there. And two, I want to make sure that it's actually adding it as a number instead of just adding it to it as a string. So it should work, quote unquote. Refresh. Test. Now the problem with that is I entered that, but that doesn't actually call the validation function. So I need to add something that does. 2, which was test and test. So that works. Perfect. Okay, so I can delete this and I can continue through. So I'm just going to copy this, paste it, change this to lname, change this to 7, that to 7, that to 7, and that to 7. Save that. Okay, so now I need to create some extra JavaScripts for those variables. So JS is equal to single quotes, semicolon, $, parentheses, double quotes, pound, fname, outside the parentheses, dot change, parentheses, semicolon, inside the parentheses, function, parentheses, curly bracers, inside the curly bracers, we go validate. That's it. Copy that one, paste it, change the F to an L, save that. So, phone number, email address, now we need address 1 and address 2. We don't need to do, so we're going to skip address 2 entirely. Address 1. City, province, postal code, and country. Okay. Now for these I didn't put the .n, but honestly if these are all run together on the same line, it's not going to kill me. I'll put one on the last one. So then we just need to add those here. Address, city, province, postal code, country. Okay, so now everything needs to be filled in, with the exception of our optional field, which is the address 2. So let's test this all out. Test, 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 which means I need to refresh it. I don't know what I hit there. So I need 555, 1, 2, 3, 4. Test at test.test. 1, 2, 3, test. We can leave that one blank. Oh. Test city in Alberta. Postal code Canada. And our register button is there. If I delete one thing, it goes away. Once everything's in there, it's all happy. And I can register. So there we go. That is done. Alright guys, that is it for this video. We will see you in the next one.